Here's a debate certain to ruin your holidays. Who did a better job of breaking Donald Trump's campaign promises, the House GOP or the Senate GOP? First, we have to recognize the winners of the tax bills being pushed forward by Republicans in both houses of Congress. There's Trump, of course, who could save his floundering presidency by bestowing billions on his rich donors, who demanded these tax breaks for them to play with in 2018 and 2020. There's also Trump's wife, his kids, and the families of all of the robber barons who served in this administration. They should love each bill like it's their billionaire daddy who went off life support seconds after he put you back in the will. What if Trump reimbursed us for his Oval Office gains? Time to start a tab. The accountants and tax lawyers of any of these unctuous oligarchs would have been proud to write either of these bills. For legislation to be any more finely tailored to fluff Trump and his plutocratic pals, like Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, it would have to allow you to claim your third wife as a dependent. But what about the forgotten men and women? And I'm not talking about the more than a dozen women who have accused Trump of sexual harassment. What about the middle class, millions of whom would pay higher taxes under either of these bills? Movian's Ben Wickler reviewed the closing argument out of Trump's campaign to remind us that the GOP nominee's blitzkrieg of race baiting and fear-mongering also had an economic component. On behalf of America's workers, Trump promised to take on the establishment and special interests that fuel the destruction of our factories and, get this, flood money into the pockets of a handful of large corporations. So which bill lands a gut punch to the establishment? The House bill eventually eliminates the estate tax, meaning the richest 0.2% of America, those who have soaked up the bulk of the gains since the Great Recession, will be able to pass on their billions to their kids for free. The Senate bill merely doubles the exemption of the tax to $11 million. So rich kids will only be able to inherit 186 times the median American household income tax-free. When it comes to perpetuating concentrated wealth at the expense of the middle class, you have to say the House GOP wins. How about those Semitic-sounding special interests? The Senate bill allows you to deduct costs for your private plane, a notable concern of the middle class since the days of the Wright brothers, while the House bill eliminates the medical expense deduction. So unless you consider kids with cancer more detestable special interests than the guys who have their own personal flight attendant, you have to say the House bill screws the interests of the average American slightly more. What about the destruction of our factories? Senator Ron Johnson, our WIS, really wants to vote for this bill that gives him a giant tax break, but he says he won't unless it gives him a bigger tax break. The seventh wealthiest person in the U.S. Senate has pointed out that both bills favor large corporations, which get over $1 trillion in tax breaks, over smaller owner-operators like, say, Ron Johnson. Both bills also move toward a territorial tax system that's likely to increase the outsourcing of American jobs. So when it comes to screwing over factory workers, this seems like a toss-up. In Thanksgiving spirit, keep DACA dreamers at the family table policing the USA. A look at race, justice, media, that's until you look at stunning sleight of hand in the Senate bill, which lets all of its individual tax breaks expire in 2027, raising taxes on every American who earns under $75,000. Foreign investors would then end up with a larger tax break than the bottom 60% of American taxpayers combined. Meanwhile, in order to put more money into the pockets of a handful of large corporations on a permanent basis, the Senate bill eliminates the individual mandate in the Affordable Care Act. That only saves money because 13 million fewer Americans will buy insurance, some by choice but many because rising prices will make it unaffordable. The government will pay out less in subsidies and the uninsured will once again be vulnerable to health problems and medical bankruptcy. Congratulations, Senate GOP. You put together the biggest ripoff of the middle class in American history, especially when you factor in the cuts to Medicare and other programs this bill could trigger and a $1 trillion hole in Medicaid that Republicans have repeatedly demanded and will inevitably demand again, despite Trump's promises to the contrary. This is a bill that's by of and for the richest Americans, being sold to the middle class by a man who seized upon and exacerbated some real economic anxiety to become the biggest popular vote loser elected president in 140 years. Trump is a man who has spent his life scamming creditors, contractors, and taxpayers.